Lacey Spears was born on the 16th of October 1987 in Decatur, Alabama, USA. She had 2 siblings and was the 3rd child in the family. According to the information we have, she had a good childhood. From a very young age, she showed an intense interest in playing with dolls and loved taking care of her dolls more than anything else. She would play with them for hours and enjoyed being responsible for someone or something. As Lacey grew older, the teenager realized she loved children very much, and thus, spending time with young children became one of Lacey Spears' favorite activities. When she was in high school, she babysat the neighbors' children, and after graduating from school, she worked at a daycare for a while. Lacey loved children, and it didn't take long for her to realize that since she loved kids so much, becoming a mother could also be a joyful experience for her. Consequently, at the age of 20, she became pregnant and decided to raise her child alone. The child's father never had a role in her life and was never meant to be a part of Lacey's small family from the beginning. In short, Lacey Spears gave birth to her son on the 3rd of December 2008 and named him Garnett Spears. Unfortunately, Lacey's life as a mother did not have a good start because little Garnett fell ill when he was only 9 days old and ended up in the hospital. Lacey would bring the baby to the hospital, saying he wasn't eating, didn't have regular bowel movements, had jaundice, had an infection, and so on. With each passing day of this child's life, his mother would come to the hospital with a new illness, always complaining with worry that Garnett was not growing well. Lacey's biggest problem was Garnett not eating. She would bring the child to the hospital in the middle of the night, telling the medical staff that Garnett hadn't eaten anything for 2 days, and they would put him on an IV. These incidents continued to the point that in Garnett's 8th month, a doctor inserted a feeding tube for the baby so his mother could feed him through it. After the tube was placed, Lacey told the doctors that Garnett was always vomiting, bringing up the contents of his stomach, and still not getting nourishment. She suggested that his esophagus be surgically closed so there would be no possibility of the 8-month-old child regurgitating food. The surgery to close Garnett's esophagus was performed, and his situation reached a point where Lacey could completely control what her child ate, and there was no way for him to vomit. She would take Garnett to the hospital every day for various reasons, to the extent that Garnett spent more time in the hospital than at home. We don't know exactly until what age the child's esophagus was closed, but he lived in this condition for at least 2 years. After 2 years, it was still impossible for him to vomit, but I think he could eat by mouth. As Garnett's illnesses increased day by day, Lacey created a Facebook page where she talked about her child's diseases, his treatment processes, and his comings and goings to the hospital. She gave daily updates on Garnett's condition, and gradually, the number of followers on her page grew. People would console Lacey, ask about Garnett's condition, and sympathize with her. It seems Lacey really enjoyed the public's attention because she expanded her activities to several social networks and soon became a blogger. Apart from Facebook, Lacey's main activity was on her blog. She dedicated this blog entirely to Garnett and only wrote about her son there. She also linked all the posts to Garnett's illness in some way. For example, in one post, she wrote, "What a month September has been, but only half of it is gone. Garnett played with his toy car in the yard under the rain. We spent a few hours together like this, but we spent the next few days in the hospital." Lacey claimed Garnett was a very sick and weak child, had a very poor physical condition, and his immune system was so weak that the slightest trigger would land him in the hospital. The noteworthy point is that, apart from Lacey's words, not a single person had noticed this child was sick, because Garnett appeared perfectly healthy and well. Lacey took the child to 20 different doctors and clinics, and spoke to all of them about her son's illness. But she was still not satisfied. It seemed that with every new doctor she found, she would take Garnett for a visit and attach a new illness to the child. After a few years, when Lacey saw she could no longer treat Garnett in Alabama, the mother and child moved to the state of Florida. Lacey continued to write about Garnett's condition on her blog and social media pages, and according to her statements, Garnett was always sick. After settling in Florida, Lacey concluded that her son's illness was due to his diet and that she had to control all of Garnett's food. Through research and inquiries with doctors and people who followed her blog, she became acquainted with a group. This group, or rather community, lived in a town-like place that also had a farm, and all of their food from A to Z was organic. Lacey and Garnett moved to this town and quickly got along with the people who lived there. Their neighbors believed Lacey was a fantastic mother who spared nothing for her child, and frankly, it seemed that way. Lacey had given up her whole life and was doing everything to make her sick son healthy. In this town, Garnett's condition seemed to be better, and most importantly, he had made a few friends. Garnett spent all his free time with these friends, and many times they would go to cafes together. The town was small, everyone knew each other, and for this reason, parents were not afraid of where their children were going. In short, Garnett went to cafes and restaurants with his friends and ate food. He was always hungry and would often ask for another plate of food. He had a good appetite, enjoyed eating food and snacks, and never said no to food. This was while Lacey claimed her child didn't eat at all. A few months of Lacey and Garnett's life in the town passed, and the neighbors realized that this child Lacey had been writing about being sick on her blog for years was, in the first place, not sick at all. Just as these neighbors were about to say something about Garnett being healthy, Lacey started posting new information and brought Garnett's father into the picture. In her blog posts, she said Garnett's father was named Blake Robinson. He was a police officer, and he had been killed in a car accident a year ago. The public's sympathy was so aroused by this information that no one said a word. You see, in truth, they all knew there was a problem, that Lacey was lying, and that her words weren't logical. But no one pointed the finger of accusation at Lacey Spears. People felt sorry for her and, on the other hand, thought it was none of their business. At the very time when the neighbors were more suspicious than ever, Garnett fell ill one day. The child had a severe headache, a fever, and eventually had a seizure. Garnett was taken to the hospital on a Friday and was immediately admitted because it was clear he was not well. But it didn't even take a day for all the symptoms of the illness to disappear. They still kept the child in the hospital. Saturday and Sunday passed, and Garnett was healthy. On Sunday afternoon, one of the doctors told Lacey, "Garnett is the picture of a healthy child," and in short, informed her, "Your child is ready for discharge." Garnett was jumping on the hospital bed with joy, and Lacey was smiling too. The nurses and doctors left the room, and within half an hour, this healthy and happy child became deathly ill. His condition became so bad that the doctors even considered death. At this time, Lacey posted on her Facebook page, "Please, for God's sake, pray for Garnett. He was doing so well, and got sick in a matter of minutes." About an hour after this post, the doctors said the severity of Garnett's illness was very high and caused the child to become brain dead. Lacey posted, "My dear baby is brain dead. It's impossible. He's my little boy. I'm not ready to let him go." Unfortunately, on that same day, the 16th of January, 2014, 5-year-old Garnett Spears lost his life. But what was the cause of death? Even the doctors didn't know the answer to this question. All Lacey told the medical staff was that her child was not well, wasn't eating, wasn't growing, and was sick. There was no specific reason behind these illnesses, and when Garnett became brain dead, they didn't even know the cause. In such situations where the circumstances seem suspicious, hospital officials contact the police. They did the same in Garnett's case, and on that very day, the 16th of November note. The text has a typo here. It was the 16th of January. They reported that a 5-year-old child had become brain dead in the hospital. He was perfectly fine a few hours ago. His mother says he has a history of illness and is always sick, but he seemed healthy. With the police involved in the case, doctors ran various tests on Garnett and discovered a very, very large and strange amount of sodium in the child's blood. Such an amount of sodium cannot naturally be in the body. And let me put it this way. The sodium in his blood was so high that the number surpassed the dose for sodium poisoning. This high number in the child's blood test proved one important point to the police and medical staff. Garnett Spears was poisoned. Someone had intentionally tried to murder the child, and Garnett's death was in no way accidental. The first question that comes to mind is, who could have poisoned a 5-year-old child? The police immediately began their investigation. And, well, for reasons that are completely obvious, their first suspect was Lacey. However, they had no evidence against Lacey and considered the possibility that perhaps the doctors were mistaken and Garnett's death was truly accidental. In the first police interrogation with Lacey, the woman again began to repeat her misfortunes. She said that Garnett was her only child, that she cared for this boy as much as the whole world, that she had dedicated her entire life to him, that Garnett was the only memory of Blake, and so on. That is, she steered the conversation towards Blake and continued that losing Blake had been very hard for them and that they had suffered during this 1 year. With Garnett's death, Lacey's family was also informed, and Lacey's father came from Alabama to Florida to be with his daughter. When the father entered the hospital, one of the police officers was the first person he saw. This police officer tried to sympathize with Lacey's father and also expressed his condolences for Daddy Blake's death. Upon hearing Blake's name, the father said, "Daddy Blake? Who is Daddy Blake?" And yes, it turned out that a person named Blake was not Garnett's father at all and had never died in a tragic car accident. The police investigated and found out that there was a man named Blake Robinson in Alabama who was a police officer, and that Lacey had gone on a few dates with him many years ago. The relationship between the two never became serious, emotional, or sexual, and they had only gone out together 2 or 3 times. The character Lacey had created of Blake Robinson, whom she introduced to everyone with the nickname Daddy Blake, and even showed his picture in a police uniform to people, in reality, never had any role in Lacey and Garnett's life. Upon discovering this new information, the police wondered that if Lacey lies about such a major issue, and even expands her lie so much, what else might she have lied about? To advance the investigation and consider all possibilities, the police obtained a warrant to search Lacey's house. Lacey and Garnett's apartment was full of medical supplies. The first thing that caught the police's attention was a feeding system that Garnett used to eat. Although the child's throat had been opened after a few years, according to Lacey's words and existing evidence, Garnett was fed through a tube, and Lacey had all the necessary equipment for feeding a child who eats through a tube. That is, she had both a pump and a large number of feeding bags, and basically everything. Next to the equipment related to the feeding system was a table where about 8 or 9 different types of medication were seen. All the drugs were on the list Lacey had given to the police, saying her son used them and needed them. The thing that set off alarm bells for the police officers was a jar that was on the shelf next to these drugs. A container of sea salt, table salt, the salt we put in our food and eat. Also, during the search of the house, the police noticed that no feeding bag was connected to the feeding system. Meanwhile, they checked Lacey's calls and saw that after Garnett's death, the woman called one of her neighbors and said, "Go into my apartment, take the used feeding bag, and throw it away. Don't tell anyone." The police found this bag in the trash can in front of the house and sent it to the lab to see what its contents were. The test results showed that the food inside the bag contained a very large and unusual amount of sodium. In total, the police collected 17 food items from Lacey's house and a significant number of them contained a large amount of sodium. What was the cause of Garnett's death? Sodium poisoning. By this point, it was clear that Lacey had been poisoning her son with table salt. But saying this is one thing, and proving it in court is another. Finding salt in Lacey's house and a discarded feeding bag were not sufficient evidence for a conviction in court. The police had to find solid evidence, and frankly, in cases like this where the killer and victim are so close, are present in public places, and their case has occurred in recent years, finding reliable evidence was not that difficult. The police were sure that Lacey suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but keep in mind that this syndrome is not very common, and none of the officers on the case had ever encountered such a case before. And you know, at the very first stage, it's very difficult to accept that this mother who is wailing in front of you, crying her eyes out in interrogations, and supposedly sad for her son, is in fact her child's killer. Even with the sodium poisoning and finding that amount of salt in Lacey's house, it was still difficult for the police to declare this woman guilty. The police searched here and there for a few days to find some solid evidence until they interrogated Garnett's former daycare teacher. And this lady told them, "Wasn't Garnett hospitalized in the pediatric ward? Why don't you check the security camera footage? Wasn't Garnett?" And it was here that the police finally realized that part of the hospital was equipped with cameras. What smart cops! They immediately went for the footage and got the video of Garnett's last few days from the hospital. Every last moment of Garnett is recorded in this video, and it shows how the child was healthy and cheerful, but then goes off camera with his mother for a few minutes to the bathroom. In a part of the video, Lacey walks in front of the camera. In one of her hands, a bottle resembling a salt container is seen, and in her other hand is Garnett's feeding bag. After a few minutes, Garnett returns from the bathroom to the bed, and his condition worsens. He hits his head against the bed in pain, tries to vomit but is unable to, and his condition becomes critical from the severity of the poisoning. The doctors come into the room, and he ultimately loses his life. This video was reliable and sufficient evidence for Lacey's arrest and conviction. The police arrested Lacey Spears and were finally able to bring this woman to court. Lacey's behavior was different each day of the trial. One day she would be shocked, another day she was angry. For several days she cried, and she also said nothing at all. Her defense team had told her to remain silent and just deny all the accusations. But the video was so catastrophic and painful that it left no room for Lacey's innocence. In court, some other evidence was also presented. An examination of Lacey's mobile phone showed that right at the time when Garnett came back from the bathroom, had just been poisoned, and his condition was slowly worsening. Lacey was lying next to him on the bed, holding her phone, and searching on Google for poisoning with salt. The officers on the case were asked if Lacey Spears was a cold-blooded killer, and one of them answered, "Lacey sat by her child's bed, watched the doctors do everything they could to keep the child alive and fail. She just sat there and watched her son die. She could have said what she had done so the doctors could try to find a solution, but she didn't. In my opinion, she is a cold-blooded killer." In April 2015, Lacey Spears was officially convicted in court. The judge addressed Lacey saying, "We don't need to be psychiatrists to know that you suffer from mental disorders, Munchausen syndrome by proxy." And then he sentenced Lacey to life in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. This woman will be eligible for parole on the 12th of June, 2034, which is about 8 years from now. After hearing her sentence, Lacey turned to the judge and said, "I am going to prison, an innocent woman. I loved my son. I took care of him and loved him. When I lost Garnett, I lost a part of my personality. I lost my future. What is your opinion? Were they mistaken?" Or was she really a cold-blooded killer?